Hello my friends, and welcome to the channel for another Escape From Tarkov video. This time with a bit of a dive into some of the most underrated 5.56 builds, and maybe some of the most underrated builds in Tarkov in general. The AK-101 and 102, the 5.56 AKs. Now when most people think about 5.56, they aren't thinking about an AK. And I think that just sort of pushes the AK-101 down to the bottom of the pile in a lot of people's minds. When you're looking at 5.56 builds, most of the time your mind goes straight to the M4, the SCAR, and the MDR, the fancy Western rifles with all their plastic and Picatinny rails. However, the AK family has two 5.56 setups, the AK-101 and AK-102, which in a lot of ways can sort of outclass the SCAR and the MDR for a very reasonable price. They can't really compete with the M4 or the 416 when they're fully modded out, but with a good build, these setups can achieve some pretty low recoil while also having pretty decent ergonomics. The AK-101 also has some crazy high muzzle velocity, even compared to other 5.56 rifles, which means your round gets to the target very quick and doesn't lose as much power or accuracy on the way there. There are some downsides, of course. The AK-101 and 102 have no mags higher than 30 rounds, which is probably the biggest thing holding them back for a lot of people. You also basically need to complete Gunsmith Part 17 to equip good suppressors onto them. However, I think the stats, combined with the overall cheap price of the AK-101, make it a very much worthwhile gun to try out, and you'll find that it's pretty capable build and it can solve a lot of problems for you. For this video, I'm going to go over a sort of budget setup and a more top of the line build for the AK-101 and AK-102. So if you want to try them out for yourself, you have a pretty good place to start out with these builds. To start off, your best bet for buying an AK-101 is to just pick it up for mechanic level 3 for about 40,000 rubles. Later in the wipe, the flea market price might drop lower, but the 101 is a gunsmith weapon, so for now, it'll be cheaper to buy it from the traders. The thing that really sets the AK-101 apart from all the other AKs is the CNC Warrior muzzle adapter, which you can buy from mechanic level 3 after completing Gunsmith 17, and it lets you attach AR-15 muzzle devices and suppressors. After adding this, for a budget build, I will almost always go for the KAC NT4 suppressor mounted on the QDC 5.56 flash hider. This setup gets you better recoil than almost any other AK specific suppressor for a very cheap price in comparison. Alternatively, if you want to really go for a budget build and you don't mind running loud, you can also swap this whole suppressor setup for the JMAC RRD 4C compensator, which gets you a lot of recoil control for just over 10,000 rubles. For budget builds, you have a lot of handguard options, but on this one, I'm going with the MOE AK handguard, which has the best ergonomic stats of the cheaper AK handguards. You'll also need two M-LOK rails to add attachments onto this handguard. On this build here, I'm going with a Magpul RVG foregrip and an X400 flashlight on the handguard, but you can use other foregrips as well to save a few rubles or to add on a bit more recoil control. After this, I add on the Bastion dust cover to get a sight mount. And then for this build, I'm just running a Delta Point reflex sight mounted on the dust cover. For the pistol grip, the Tapco Saw pistol grip is a really good budget option. And then I also add on the GP25 recoil pad for some extra stats on the basic AK stock. Finally, there's a CSS charging handle as well for the extra ergonomics. This build right here gets you 50 recoil and 50 ergonomics suppressed for a total cost around 130 to 150,000 rubles total. It's a really solid build for a pretty good price. And I think the main downside to this one is that you have to wait until mechanic level 3 to unlock the muzzle adapter. You can also set up this exact same build on the shorter AK-102 with no changes required and very similar overall stats, which you can see right here. Next up, we'll take a look at setting up the AK-101 with max level traders and getting the stats improved basically as far as you can go. This setup isn't too different from the standard AK meta build, which does make sense considering it is an AK after all. But for this one, I'm still sort of focusing on trying to keep the price reasonable and the ergonomics okay, but looking to lower the recoil as much as reasonably possible. First, you want to add the CNC Warrior muzzle adapter again, and then you can slap on a suppressor. For my pick on this build, I'm going with the AAC SDN6 suppressor, mounted on the 51T muzzle device. This suppressor is technically not the best in slot for 5.56, but it is very close, and it can sometimes be half the price of other suppressors that are just a couple points better. You can also use any of the other best in slot M4 suppressors like the Griffin, Saker, Thunderbeast, or the Thor, but I think the SDN6 pairs pretty well with the AK-101 to keep the stats good and the cost low. Next, you want to replace the AK-101 gas tube and handguard with the Troy handguard and gas block combo, which is the best in slot handguard for recoil on AKs at mechanic level 4. This handguard also takes special QARS rails sold by Mechanic to add attachments. For a grip on this build, I usually run the RK1 for a balance of good recoil with a small ergonomics bonus. But you can also swap this out for the RK2 grip for more recoil, or the RVG for better ergonomics. After this, I add a Bastion dust cover again, and then something like a hollow sight or whatever you prefer. The high muzzle velocity of this build works great for ranged shooting, so this build works fine with magnified scopes. For the stock, the best overall setup on these modern AKs is to use the Zenit PT3 Classica stock, which gets you the best combination of recoil and ergonomics. Finally, the last pieces on here are the Tango Down battle grip and a CSS charging handle for some more ergo. With this setup, you can get 39 vertical recoil, or even lower, and about 44 ergonomics, for a total price somewhere around 190 to 200,000 rubles. The recoil is very easy to control, and it's a pretty light and snappy build, so overall, I think it's quite good. For the last build in this video, I have a sort of best in slot build for the shorter AK-102. The 102 is a neat little rifle that has almost all of the same advantages of the AK-101, except for one thing. It shoots 50 RPM slower, meaning that it doesn't pump out as much damage per second, which can be kind of awkward when we're talking about 5.56 or 5.45 that need fire rate to compensate for overall lower damage. That being said, it's still quite the fun little build, and personally, I just think the short AK-100 rifles look so nice that it's hard for me to not end up using them every once in a while. First things first, the muzzle device is going to be the same as the AK-101 setup, starting off with the CNC Warrior adapter, and then adding the SDN6 suppressor, or one of the other top tier 5.56 options if you want to min-max even harder. After this, add on the Zenit B30 handguard, which is sold by Skier level 4, but also has a pretty easy barter trade for a couple RAM sticks at mechanic level 2. The AK-102 can't use the full length handguards with better stats, so you need to use this handguard combined with the Zenit B33 dust cover to get the best possible recoil stats on the AK-102. For your choice of grip, I would say that I prefer to use the Magpul RVG because of the good ergonomics, but the RK1 and RK2 work well on this setup to cut the recoil down by a few extra points. Next, I add the Zenit PT3 Classica stock, the Tango Down battle grip, and a CSS charging handle as well for the extra ergonomics. With this setup right here, I end up with 43 vertical recoil and about 54 ergonomics. So as you can see, even on the short build with a few cut corners, the recoil stat ends up being pretty good on the AK-102. And if you can see past the slower fire rate, this setup is quite cool to run. Well, that kind of covers it for this look at the AK-101 and AK-102. I've been meaning to cover them lately and try them out after the recoil patch, so it's nice to get them out of the way and share a couple builds that I like. Of course, these aren't the only viable builds, and that's kind of the beauty of the AK. There's so many good attachments for them, you're only limited by your imagination. So I encourage you to use this guide as a starting point and make your own creations from there. What do you think? Is the AK-101 really an underrated build, or is it just a slightly more budget MDR with no 60 rounder? Let me know down in the comments and we can discuss. Thanks for checking out the video. I've got links to my Twitch stream and Discord server down below for anyone interested. And until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.